Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Dear listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. A very good evening and welcome back to Friday Night Fusion, the new sound of Great Britain, broadcasting live and interactive on 93.5 FM, Unity FM across Birmingham and surrounding areas, and via all of our media partners up and down the country. Alhamdulillah, with your du'as and with your support, Friday Night Fusion is now the largest news, entertainment and current affairs show on UK community radio. So please do continue to remember us in your du'as so that we can continue to provide the community with impartial broadcasting, lively debates and interesting discussions. You've heard over the past hour a very, very moving interview with one of the few remaining Holocaust survivors. Indeed, I think it's fair to say that hers was an experience that very few people will go through during their life, and we should be very grateful for that. But equally, we should also celebrate those individuals who were prepared to sacrifice their own lives to stop the type of oppression that you've just been hearing about in the past hour. These weren't just white indigenous people from Great Britain, but indeed many Muslims as well from all over the world. Joining me now to talk about this matter further, I have Judge Khurshid Drabu, who is currently an advisor, the Muslim advisor to the Ministry of Defence, and also one of the founding members of the Muslim Council of Britain. Judge Khurshid, thank you very much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum to you, brother. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. First and foremost, Judge Khurshid, a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that Muslims actually played an instrumental role in the First and Second World War. Many people that were signed up to the army, in fact, from India, were indeed Muslim. The MCB has recently published a very good booklet on this particular subject. How has the booklet been received?
Booklet has been very well received, but it wasn't published recently. It was published last year, or indeed even the year before. But unfortunately, all the good news about Muslims gets buried in the negative media that we have surrounding us all the time. So with the best will in the world, you're fighting against a tide which is very, very difficult. I mean, indeed, Muslims have made phenomenal contributions in both world wars. And it has been the largest volunteer army that was put together for the Second World War from the Indian subcontinent. And majority of those people in the armed forces belong to the Muslim faith. They came from Punjab, they came from northwest frontier, and there were some from the Rajputs and some from the Sikhs. But Muslims played a predominant part, and it is now gradually coming to surface as to how they were treated and how they fought so magnificently to give us the freedoms that we all cherish and that we all love in this country.
When you tell this story that is not often told about the great heroic Muslims, not just Muslim men but also Muslim women like Noor Inayat Khan, we spoke to her biographer a few weeks ago on this very program. How is this information received? Is it received with a huge element of shock, or are people quite used to receiving this sort of information?
I think you said it right, with a huge amount of shock and surprise even amongst our Muslim brothers and sisters, because it's not a news that has been around for very long, and people haven't shown much interest in getting it together. But inshallah, we're getting there. But we all have to be focused on the good things that we have brought to this country, and not just talk about the negativities. Unfortunately, those negativities, as I said, we can't blame them on the media all the time. Some of us are responsible for making those stories, and we don't celebrate the good things as you are doing in this program.
As you probably heard there in my introduction, we've just been in conversation with one of the Holocaust survivors, in fact the only Auschwitz survivor here in the West Midlands, somebody who told a truly horrific story of her accounts, what she went through, what her family went through, and all the people that were held in that camp with her. If we did tell the story more of the role that Muslims actually played during the world wars, don't you think actually this would help towards a lot of social cohesion, not just here in Birmingham but also around the country? Obviously there are very controversial wars going on around the world where perhaps relations between particular faiths have been significantly affected. But do you think that talking about how Muslims were actually there fighting to stop this sort of oppression, would that play a good role in social cohesion today?
Very much so, brother, very much so. But we should also not forget that Muslims also have suffered the worst kind of atrocities against our faith, against Islam. Not many moons ago, and not many continents apart. We are talking about the atrocities committed against Muslims in the civilized continent of Europe. We don't talk enough about Bosnia. We don't talk enough about the atrocities that were committed in Kosovo and those regions. They were horrific crimes. One human life is one too many when it's taken in that brutal manner. Not for a moment minimizing the pain and the agony suffered by our Jewish cousins during the Holocaust. But don't forget that the message of Holocaust doesn't appear to have sunk in, because we are still engaged in various parts of the world in the same kind of atrocities that were perpetuated by Hitler. It is tragic that the horrors of Vietnam, the horrors of Cambodia, the horrors of Rwanda, the brutality of Bosnia, they don't get the same kind of attention because we don't appear to be talking about them at all. The Muslim Council of Britain has been at the forefront of raising these issues and saying, hold on, it is important to tell us about Holocaust. It is important to pay respect to the millions of people who were slaughtered for no reason except that they belonged to a particular faith. We completely respect that, and we are very saddened by that. And we respect the memory of Holocaust. But at the same time, please remember others so that we begin to learn lessons and we begin to live in peace with each other.
When we talk about the contribution that Muslims played in the world wars,
yes,
how has this sort of information been received, particularly by our young people out there? We regularly talk about young people feeling as though they don't have a greater sense of connection to this country, the United Kingdom. We hear about young people, particularly young Muslims of today, facing what has been coined an identity crisis. You hear young Muslims that were actually born in the UK talking about going home when they talk about going on holiday to Pakistan.
Yes.
What role do you think this sort of information plays for particularly those people?
Absolutely. I think it would play a very, very important and crucial role. You see, we have to understand that we are living in very difficult times. We can't blame the youth for not engaging fully. We can't blame ourselves for not being, upfront out there saying Muslims get together and we are citizens of this country. We do that enough. But the blame also lies on the other side. The politics of this country has not been the best as far as the Muslims are concerned. In the last 10 years, we have been engaged in unjust and at least one illegal war, and the wars committed against those countries happen to be the acts of aggression have been committed against countries that have predominantly Muslim population. For youth, angry youth and people who are upset and frustrated, they need to get rid of their frustration and anger through discussion, through studying their faith properly, not be misguided by elements that misconstrue our faith. They need to understand the ways followed by our Prophet, peace be upon him. We are required to be good citizens, and we are required to respect other faiths as well as follow our own faith. Now, the story about the world wars is very, very important. It shows that we have given our blood, the blood of our ancestors, have been instrumental in keeping us a free and civilized country. We have shown, without raising slogans, we have demonstrated it by our actions, that we are committed to equal rights and liberty and freedom, both in our domestic countries, the countries that many of us have come from, and also in this country.
When we look back at the types of people that actually went forward and fought alongside the Allies, fought alongside the British in fighting for the very freedoms that we enjoy today, something that you've just rightly identified, what was their motivation to want to go out and fight? Why were they prepared to make such a huge sacrifice, that of their life, if it was necessary?
You can imagine, if you put it in context, at that particular time, the people who went to fight were fighting for the nation that had colonized them, that is Britain. And in spite of that experience of having been colonized, they understood that it is better for their future, for the future of their children, to go and fight for the values that Britain stood for, rather than either be passive or side with the aggressor, that is Hitler's Nazi regime.
When we analyze the sheer sacrifice that was made on the part of Muslim soldiers, would it be fair to say that actually without that involvement from the Asian subcontinent, without that involvement from India and other countries and the part of the Muslim community as was then as a whole, would we find ourselves perhaps living in a very different Britain right now?
Very much so, brother, very much so, because I believe from the documents that are coming up now and research is coming through, that without the massive participation of people from the Indian subcontinent, be they Muslims, Sikhs or Hindus, we would have been living in a different environment altogether. Our contribution was crucial, absolutely crucial, in the tragic wars that the world was engaged in, not once but twice.
We've actually seen over the years that there has developed, and some can see why, a huge amount of perhaps reluctance on the part of many young Muslims out there to want to engage in the military, to want to be a part of the army, perhaps caused by the controversial wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, as you mentioned earlier. I believe that now Muslim soldiers perhaps make up around 400, I believe, currently, according to recent figures that have actually been published. You're actually a Muslim advisor to the Ministry of Defense. If our ancestors were able to make such a huge contribution and play such a pivotal role in fighting for the very freedoms that we enjoy today, what work do you think can be carried out to perhaps invite more Muslims to feel as though they have what it takes to join the military, to join the forces?
Yes. If I could make a correction, we are not just 400 now. the figure has risen to about 700 Muslims in the forces.
Right.
So we have made some progress, but absolutely right, not enough. Not enough. We need to do more, and in fact, I have to say that the Ministry of Defense and the armed forces have been very welcoming of all the religious requirements that we have for our faith. What has happened is that people have held back because of the cutbacks in the army. The salary levels are not fantastic, and it is not a career that is a conventional career for people from our background. But what needs to be explained is that if you join the forces, you're not necessarily joining to fight a war. There are many career opportunities within the armed forces which are extremely appealing and highly valued and regarded. People of our faith need to understand that those professions and those careers are open to them as well. They don't have to, go to the battlefront. They can become doctors, they can become nurses, they can become engineers. So there is a lot of scope in joining the armed forces and doing our best for the nation, because not everybody who joins the armed forces goes out to battle.
And indeed, this sense of respect that you refer to, and this sense of accommodation as well that you refer to on the part of Great Britain, isn't just something that has popped up today. We see accounts going back to the time of the World Wars, where many Muslim soldiers talked of having the facilities to pray, having the facilities to perform their Eid prayer, and for Ramadan.
Absolutely. Yes. But that is fantastic. That's really great to know. But there's been a huge improvement in the last 10 years, because what happened was that armed forces were found to be racially discriminating in one of their regiments or battalions. I used to work at the Commission for Racial Equality those days. That's about 15 years ago. And a non-discrimination notice was served upon the armed forces, and it became quite embarrassing. But thereafter, the progress has been absolutely fantastic. We were pushing the MCB when we made representations for the appointment of the first civilian imam in the armed forces to look after Muslims. We were pushing at an open door. There was no hesitation on the part of the ministry or the armed forces, and that led to the appointment of the first civilian imam. Because chaplaincy until 2003 or 2004, was completely a Christian chaplaincy. As a result of Muslim chaplain being appointed, chaplains from other faiths were appointed as well. And that has made quite a lot of difference, because the chaplain is responsible for providing spiritual and pastoral care for Muslim soldiers, and that has been a huge success. And the armed forces have also relaxed in their attitudes about beards, about hijab, about certainly compliant with our dietary requirements, compliant with our need for prayers. But things are very, very Muslim friendly. We have to give them that credit, and we have got to enjoy that freedom and make sure that we make the best of it.
And of course, I guess it's also moving away from this notion as well that the armed forces, and by joining the armed forces, you're automatically joining up to controversial wars like the ones that we've seen over the past decade. There's more to it than that, isn't there?
Very much so. And the controversial wars, unfortunately, that we have been engaged in are not the responsibility of the army or the armed forces or the Ministry of Defense. They are just executing orders from politicians. And who elected the politicians? We elected them. We should hold them to account. We need to say to the politicians, well, enough is enough. We don't want wars. Now, we are now going into Mali. God knows what's going to happen now. and for how long this is going to drag on. We haven't got enough. In the coffers here, people are suffering. The economic situation of the country is becoming dire, and there we are engaging in foreign excursions. It is very sad.
But of course, as you rightly identify there, when we look beyond these sorts of wars, and of course these wars do have to be debated and do have to be discussed in their own setting,
Yes.
but when we look in the wider context of what function the military, the army actually performs, we're talking about the protection of our country, we're talking about a very, very important duty that many people out there could potentially engage in.
That's right. That is absolutely right. Because as far as, you so rightly put it, army is not about aggression. Army is about defending our country.
When you actually go out there and speak to members of the Muslim community, of course you're somebody who's very active on this particular front, and you tell specifically youngsters of today that your ancestors fought in the world wars and fought alongside the British and very much played an instrumental role in getting the type of lifestyle that we enjoy today. Does this in any way encourage them or persuade them to actually want to look at a career in the armed forces more than they would have initially anticipated?
I have to sort of make one amendment here or correction here. My role is not recruiting Muslims as an advisor. I'm there to make sure that the practices and policies of the Ministry of Defense in relation to our faith are compliant with procedures and the law. Right? They have got their own teams who go out for recruiting people from different backgrounds and different faith communities.
But of course you do speak to young Muslims, I would presume, about these sorts of issues.
Locally as well as nationally.
Yes, in that capacity,
Yes. The team is consistent, and one can't tell whether it makes a difference. But you get a very polite, polite hearing, and you only hope that you made an impact, but you have to keep going on, because it is a difficult issue, and you have got to understand the feelings and sentiments of the other side as well.
And I suppose especially at a time like this, where perhaps the situation is rather volatile, it can make it slightly difficult to persuade people to perhaps join the armed forces. Do you actually think as well, Judge Khurshid, that there has been a sense of disconnection on our part as a British people as a whole, because of the fact that actually during the lifetime of many youngsters growing up today, our country hasn't faced a significant national threat of invasion, and we haven't really understood the role of the military?
I think that you've hit the right spot, absolutely right. We haven't had that national threat except for isolated instances of terrorism on our soil. That has led to a lot of action and anxiety, sometimes rather disproportionate to the threat that we have faced. But it is something that we have to bear in mind all the time. But because there has been no aggression from outside, aggression in the conventional sense, so our youth haven't understood the value of our armed forces.
Judge Khurshid Drabu, it's been an absolute honour having you on the programme today, and we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, brother. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you. And to you. There you have it, dear listeners. A very interesting chat there with Judge Khurshid Drabu from the Muslim Council of Britain, of course, a Muslim advisor as well to the Ministry of Defence, and a very, very insightful take, I think, on what the current situation is so far as Muslim involvement in the military is concerned, why it has been affected, and also looking back as well, more importantly, which has been the theme of the past 1.5 hours, on the Second World War, what exactly happened during the Holocaust, and actually the imperative role that the Muslim community as well as other communities played in actually showing quite clearly with their lives as well that they weren't prepared to allow the type of oppression that you saw being administered by the Nazis to continue. Very inspirational stuff indeed. It is Friday Night Fusion, the new sound of Great Britain. Many of you getting in touch on at Friday Night 935, which is our Twitter page, and Friday Night 935, which is our Facebook page. So please do keep those messages coming through. We also do have an email address for those of you who are on email right now, fridaynight@unityfm.net, and we will be featuring some of your very interesting comments later on in the program. Friday Night Fusion back after this commercial break.